Josiah, author of Runner's High and the Carnality series, is a freelance journalist out of Denver, Colorado, covering everything from politics, science, and crime to art, pop culture, and evangelical culture and theology. A regular contributor to The Guardian and Vice, his work has appeared in Esquire, Newsweek, Men's Health, and Politico, among other publications. Written in vivid prose, his new book, On Fire for God, is both an unflinching memoir of a religious trauma and survival and a stirring examination of the emotional, political, and sociological effects of the Christian right. Returning to his hometown in search of answers about his upbringing and the political forces at work in the region, Hesse calls into question prevailing theories about the disappearing working class that points to opioids, automation, or globalism as the culprits. I personally love his journalistic approach to something very deeply personal in going back to his hometown in Iowa. So please give a big welcome to Josiah Hesse.
Hello. Thanks for coming out, everybody. So, yeah, as you just heard, I have a book that's kind of like a Swiss Army knife of several different topics and artistic mediums. It's a combination of memoir and journalism about my experience growing up in religious extremism in North Iowa, but I also kind of expanded that window to talk about my family, going back a few generations, about a century, but then using that to talk about the broader historical conversation of how conservative evangelical Christianity has impacted working class families in America for the worse, just to clarify. So there's a lot that's going on in this book. I wrote several different drafts of it. It took about 3 years to fully compose, about 9 different drafts, one of which I think was like 900 pages. I had to slice it down considerably. But I used a kind of Stephen King prose narrative to kind of weave it all together. So hopefully it is accessible and cohesive and a good read, which is my ultimate goal with anything, is to not waste a reader's time and to give them, something captivating, something they don't have to struggle through or feel like is homework, but is something you get home from work and you're excited to dip into. I had a very large presentation prepared for tonight, showing the scope of what I've been talking about over the last century, all of these different factions, from the KKK to Billy Sunday to Billy Graham, Jerry Falwell, Ronald Reagan, George W. Bush, leading up to today with the MAGA movement, all tied together around this musical called The Music Man, which is about my hometown in North Iowa and plays a very large part in my book, the idea of hucksters that are coming to town and getting people afraid of new technology, new changes in gender identity, sexuality, minorities finding their place in society. But at the last minute, something happened that made me change course with tonight. I got news maybe like 6 hours ago, that a very dear childhood friend of mine, who is featured in this book, was found dead in his home, face down on the carpet. And those are the only details that I have. As you can imagine, when the day that your book is released, there's a lot going on, a lot of messages to field, and I had this event coming up, and it's just been a whirlwind of emotion and overwhelming emotion followed by numbness. I think it's somewhat of a universal experience of losing someone and not really knowing how to react. So I set aside that presentation somewhat happily because it was getting overwhelming, the technology and weaving together all these different things and stepping outside my comfort zone with a new medium. I've been doing readings for a while, but audiovisual presentations were kind of new to me. So in tribute to my dear friend who's passed, I thought I would read a couple sections from the book that feature him. And this first one takes place on New Year's 1999, right after New Year's, when I was obsessed with the Y2K scare and was convinced by all of my evangelical leaders that this would be the end of the world. And me and my friend from the Christian school were suddenly left with this apocalypse fatigue, not really knowing how to deal with these emotions that we were experiencing with the end of the world not occurring and suddenly being forced into an adulthood that we had been told since childhood would never arrive. I'm taking off my glasses. These are just for distances. I can't really read with them. What is that word? Is it nearsighted or farsighted when you need glasses for distances? Farsighted? Okay, I always get it mixed up. Okay, so New Year's midnight at the Evangelical Free Center. I was there with my best friend, Thad. I first met Thad at North Iowa Christian School when I was in first grade and he was in second, but neither of us recall much about this. We were reunited in the mosh pit of a Fillmore concert in Mason City years later. For those who don't know, evangelical culture takes the media from secular culture and kind of reappropriates it. So I didn't know that punk rock wasn't an evangelical institution. I didn't know anything about the Clash or the Sex Pistols. I was all MXPX and Supertones. Both of us now fumbling through our early teenage years. Him in a Superman t-shirt and me in Jinko jeans with a 50-inch hem around the opening of the feet. Still freckled with screaming red hair, he'd shed his baby fat since we met on the playground at North Iowa Christian School. Thad wasn't very tall, but years of farm work had swelled his arms and legs with rock-hard muscle, and somehow his pale complexion tanned in the summer instead of burning like most ginger boys. His hair would turn a light strawberry blonde, which contrasted brilliantly with his deep brown eyes. "Want to drive to Walmart and buy the new MXPX CD?" he asked me. Most of the cool kids had already left the New Year's Eve party. "Heck yeah," I said. This offer was just about as good as life got for a couple of teenage Christian boys in a small town. We left E-Free Church and hopped into a black 1971 Dodge Challenger, which Thad had restored by himself after finding it in a junkyard the year before. Unlike me, Thad was a real farm boy, the kind who had been working on his parents' farm since he could walk, rising before dawn to put in a few hours before school, then putting in a few more after he got home, and working round the clock all summer long. His parents had come to Agape, which is the church that I grew up in, off and on throughout the 80s. But though they were on board with the anti-government politics and end times prophecies, there were many reasons Thad's family lived on a farm, not just agriculture, they were put off by what they viewed as our foolish and biblically inaccurate Pentecostal rituals, which is a lot of like shaking, sprinting, speaking in tongues, the really wild shit I'm sure you've seen in some YouTube videos. As we were flipping through the CD racks, Thad asked, "Do you think you could teach me how to dance?" I looked over at him and saw his freckled face flush bright red. There were no proms or homecoming events at Forest City Christian School, which is where he went, and I would eventually follow him too after leaving the public school. Only at banquets, with no dancing allowed. I'd been dancing in church and at Christian rock concerts since I could walk, But Thad's church wasn't Pentecostal like ours, and he'd never dared to move his body to any kind of rhythm, despite being an excellent guitar player and songwriter. Thad wanted to go to dance clubs in Iowa City or Des Moines, but was sure he'd make a fool of himself if placed on the dance floor. Like so many Iowans I knew, Thad often became embarrassed when he revealed any sort of passion or ambition. He was constantly on the lookout for landmines of humiliation, always paranoid that everyone was laughing at him. We'd start talking about hosting a comedy show on the radio together, or starting a band and moving to a big city. But whenever I mentioned this in front of other people, he'd either deny it or say it was just some stupid idea I'd come up with. I'm going to jump around a little bit throughout the book. I go through a lot of different changes over the course of this story, from evangelical zealot to drugged out, rave-loving hippie, and eventually came out of my faith. But this was coming out of a surgery I had where I was kind of holed up and found my love of books and writing. Oh, goodness. I'm getting ahead of myself. I had a couple of drinks at the PS Lounge before I came here. So. Yeah, didn't need that second gin and tonic. We're like 18, fresh out of school, and I was working at the Winnebago factory, and someone just gave me a joint, and I came home and told Thad about it. Intoxicants of any kind were taboo on my maternal Methodist side of the family. Methodists were leaders in the temperance movement, and we were often told stories of our grandfather, Josiah, for whom I was named, hiding under the corn crib when his father drank, hoping to escape a merciless beating. Alcohol, marijuana, heroin, they were all the same, according to Midwestern evangelicals. And yet, without hesitation, the second I got home that day, I exclaimed to Thad, "I have a joint. Want to smoke it?" "Fuck yeah," Thad said, searching his pocket for a lighter. I wasn't sure exactly when Thad started living with us. It was after a brief stint in Des Moines that I ran out of money and moved into my dad's house in Clear Lake. Thad stayed over most weekends. Then we pooled our money and bought a $200 car from a junkyard to get us around. After that, he just never left. Like every other farm in the Midwest, his families had slowly phased out all livestock when industrial farming took over the industry and shrank their crop production until there was almost nothing left for Thad to inherit. The smell of the burning cannabis made the connection to my father even more visceral. Early in the story, the first time I smelled weed, I said, "Oh, that smells like my dad," which connected a lot of dots in my mind. I'd been inhaling that scent off him as far back as I can remember, and now that I finally knew what it was, Dad wasn't there. He'd moved out, and me and Corey took over the house. He'd had that house for more than a decade, the greatest symbol of material success he'd ever known. To me, it was the clean home with good food where my older, cooler brother and sister lived. Now they were all gone, and I was on drugs. "Turn it up," Thad said, as we listened to the Smashing Pumpkins' Melancholy and the Infinite Sadness on a cheap boombox. Thad and I had recently been getting a low-grade thrill from exploring all the classic 90s albums we'd missed out on while restricting ourselves to exclusively Christian music. By the time we'd finished that joint, we'd gone through all the CDs by Oasis, Beck, Nirvana, and Fiona Apple, my choice, that we'd purchased at the pawn shop the day before. We sat silently through each album, disappearing into the guitar solos, the harmonies, the production tricks of the recording, our minds hungrily clamoring after every detail. So now we're at that part where I just came out of surgery that I had introduced so inelegantly before. Thad visited me a week after my surgery. He looked pale and skinny. So much of his farm boy muscle faded away. After making some chit-chat for a few minutes, bouncing his knee anxiously, he asked, "You gonna take those?" gesturing at my hydrocodone prescription. Though I'd eventually outgrow it, at the time I still had a fear of pills, remembering my days on Ritalin as a kid. So I endured a transcendent level of constant pain while recovering from my surgery without any pharmaceutical intervention. "No, you can have them," I said, thinking nothing of it. After all, drugs were just a fun, whimsical novelty, right? We're only using them to enhance our experiences, to playfully manipulate our consciousness, to expand our minds via neuropsychopharmacology, weren't we? At this time, I knew little of the opioid epidemic simmering in Mason City. I was unaware that 80% of heroin addicts had initially gotten hooked on prescription pain medication. Thad and I both snorted lines of crushed up OxyContin at parties, but although the feeling was fantastic, smothering me in a maternal bliss I'd not felt since before my mother's breakdown, for me, it was nothing compared with the communal love that ecstasy delivered, or the transporting romanticism of cannabis. For Thad, however, opiates were a total game changer. They were the answer to every lingering question or discomfort life threw at him, soothing his insecurities and panicky sense of alienation. He consumed my prescription in a matter of days, then asked me to refill it twice, which was not difficult in 2002, years before doctors began cracking down on such things. I was unaware that, in addition to this, Thad was purchasing OxyContin from our retired neighbor with terminal cancer and a generous prescription, along with morphine from a nurse who lived in our basement. This nurse also had access to medical-grade liquid cocaine and regularly injected it into the webbing between his toes so he wouldn't have visible track marks. So, skipping forward to the year 2023, I'm just realizing now that so many of these sections are focusing on drugs, and while drugs are a part of this book, I see in the introduction, it was said that I believe the working class degradation is caused by more than just opioids, that there's a concerted effort on the Christian right to manipulate a lot of these poor families for the worse, and that is a big theme throughout the book. But I am devoting tonight to my dear friend and want to read the sections from the book that are about him, and so a lot of those are about drugs. So I came home in 2023 after writing about the Christian right for several years and kind of putting together this idea of economic and mental, emotional manipulation of the Christian right on working class families like mine. And I did several interviews with family members and friends, probably over 100 hours of interviews in total, just kind of trying to get everyone else's perspective on what I grew up with, what our community had endured, and a lot of people disagreed with my premise. Naturally, a lot of them are still evangelicals. A lot of them were, Trump voting Republicans. So there was a lot of healing, a lot of catharsis, but also a lot of conflict in those interviews, and they weren't easy. And that is illustrated in this book. I'm currently sitting on a park bench in the middle of the 4th of July carnival in Clear Lake. Guns N' Roses, Welcome to the Jungle, blasting out of the nearby Gravitron. We have a big 4th of July celebration in Clear Lake. It's a tourist town. It's a town that killed Buddy Holly, funnily enough. Richie Valens, that's their big claim to fame. They'll let you know at every turn. The smell of funnel cakes and diesel generators in the air. Waiting for Thad, who is almost an hour late. Searching for the comfort of his face in this crowd reminds me of a cold night in the parking lot of a cheap motel in Michigan, 20 years earlier. And that story is told in the book, where we both worked for a puppy delivery service that I had no idea what I was getting into. It was probably the darkest part of the book, where we visit a lot of puppy mills throughout Iowa. It was in the middle of our puppy mill odyssey, both of us vomiting and running high fevers. Though we were supposed to keep driving 24/7, we had checked into a roadside motel out of desperation, spending what little money we had, we were making on the hotel. At some point in the night, I awoke to find myself in the parking lot, in my underwear, in January. I had sleepwalked out of the hotel room and was now staring back at an endless row of doors, having no idea which was ours. Helplessly, I randomly knocked on the first door I walked up to. Shockingly, Thad answered. I let out a shriek of relief, grabbed him tight, and wept into his neck. It was more than escaping humiliation or hypothermia. It was a rush of oxytocin at being reunited with the face I'd most associated with the word home. My memories with Thad are the greatest hits of my youth. Driving down gravel roads in the middle of the night, smoking weed in Pall Malls, choking down Mad Dog 2020 while blasting Radiohead, Tool, or the Smashing Pumpkins at full volume, feeling spooky yet sublime, with nowhere to go, nowhere to be, just lost in the headlights, chasing along the cornfields. I'm looking forward to spending time with an ally, someone who knows me, knows my worldview, my writing, and is on board with the premise of my book without my even having to articulate it. Hey, loser, he says, startling me from behind. Thad has lost his boyish handsomeness. His red hair has receded, and deep lines around his mouth and forehead, along with a few ill-gotten scars, give his face a kind of world-weary Clint Eastwood effect. He's gained some weight, but that's mostly from his year of sobriety from meth and opioids, while still enjoying a few other softer substances. For the most part, he still has that muscled, capable, farm boy body he had when we were teenagers, partly because he spent the last few years working the fields around North Iowa. Until recently, every dime he made in those fields went straight into his arm. When I saw him 2 summers ago, he looked as pale and gaunt as Christian Bale in The Machinist. You want to rent some bicycles and ride around the lake? He asks. Fuck yeah, I say. I did the math recently, Thad tells me as we escape the din of the carnival and hop on our rented bikes, and I've amassed over 10,000 hours of withdrawal time. 10,000 hours of moaning and grinding my forehead into the carpet, sick all day and night, no sleeping or eating, constant vomiting, diarrhea, wishing I was dead. Though it's terribly selfish, in this moment I can't help but think, why didn't that happen to me? Would that have been my fate if I'd stayed here? I had really wanted Thad to come with me when I moved to Denver. I wanted us to start a band or a radio show like we'd always talked about as kids. I wanted to take him out dancing at my favorite clubs, introduce him to other musicians, watch him blossom into the artist he was meant to be. I feel guilty whenever talking to him about my writing career, like I'm rubbing his nose in it. He's still the shy boy who wanted me to teach him to dance, wanted to make the world laugh or be in awe of his songwriting, but was too deeply smothered in shame to perform his songs anywhere beyond a handful of shows in Mason City bars. Thad is a master oral storyteller, able to bring an audience to tears of laughter, assuming it's an audience of friends he's comfortable with and he's chemically stimulated. But when I try now to get him to recount a few of the classic gonzo tales of his past, he only looks at the floor and mumbles, full of regret and self-loathing. I've done a lot of things I have a hard time forgiving myself for, he says, his voice carrying a tremendous amount of weight and sadness. This is something new. We'd always viewed our hedonistic exploits, no matter how debauched, illegal, or questionable, as charming tributes to our liberation from evangelical Christianity. As far as I'm aware, we never hurt anyone, so I don't know what he would have to feel guilty about. I've often viewed Thad as my Neil Cassidy, the real-life inspiration behind On the Road's Dean Moriarty, and Randall P. McMurphy in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. Characters full of zest and humor, sucking the marrow out of life. I'm good at writing stories, but Thad is a story, a walking, breathing poem. Whenever I turn my recorder off, he's his old self again, the misanthropic trickster, the hyper boy interrupting himself with one story after another about Christian school, sexual misadventures, and our drug-fueled fantasy life before everything went sour. When I turn the recorder back on, he returns to the monologue of self-loathing, full of regrets and perceived failures, as if he didn't believe he was worthy of feeling good about himself. I can feel my mannerisms softening again, my voice returning to normal, a higher register, my wrists going limp and my speech dramatic. Earlier in the book, I turned back into the masculine, corn-fed Iowa farm boy that I pretended to be for 20 years while living there. Then Thad looks at me sideways, with a bit of suspicion and possibly a hint of embarrassment. It's a look I recall him giving me when I first started at Forest City Christian School, when my bullies suddenly turned their eyes on him. "Could you have found any shorter shorts, Josiah?" he says with a laugh, pointing at my retro basketball shorts. I chuckle along with him, though I do pull the legs of the shorts down a touch, suddenly aware of my exposed scars. Earlier in the book, I talk about a proclivity I had for cutting as a young man. For the first time, I notice his grubby farm boy clothes, steel-toed boots, buzz cut, and good old boy slouch in his chair as he drinks a light beer, contrasted with my vintage booty shorts, fishnet tank top, and Timothy Chalamet curls, sipping a Cape Cod. For a brief moment, I feel the conflicting impulses to both protect him and to be protected from him. The sun has set, and a thunderstorm is brewing on the other side of the lake. Lightning flashes, briefly illuminating the air. "Fuck you," I say, playfully kicking him under the table. I don't know what happened in the mid-90s to make men so scared of their own thighs, but for most of the 20th century, this is what men's shorts look like, you Philistine. "Doesn't bother me," he says, "so long as you're not into the whole pronoun thing." At first I'm confused, wondering if he's suddenly making an argument about grammar. "I'm sorry, what pronoun thing?" I ask. "Are you referring to transgender people?" "Yeah," he says, sitting up in his seat. "Well, I don't hate them. I'm just not down with all that, especially when it's used to confuse children." I want to ask what he means by that. Trans people in general, or just preferred pronouns? I'm a bit taken aback. I've never heard Thad talk about any culture war issues before, yet he seemed to bring it up out of nowhere, shoehorning the subject into our conversation when we'd otherwise be talking about gobbling ecstasy at raves in 2002, or fighting over the last box of tuna helper when we were broke. I'd made the classic mistake of the modern era, assuming that because you share affection with someone, you also share the same worldview. Before I can ask a follow-up question, he volunteers more opinions about gender expression, critical race theory, and why he refused the COVID vaccine, sounding like the right-wing pundits we used to laugh at. Gently, I ask him about his media diet, wondering where all this is coming from. "I don't watch the news anymore," he says. "Common sense is where I get my news." I roll my eyes at this. It's the same response I get from every conservative I speak with, despite their eventual admission that they watch conservative programs on One America News, Newsmax, or Fox News, or read right-wing blogs like the Epoch Times or the Washington Examiner. I suspect they feel condescended to when I ask about their media diet, as though I'm dismissing their views as propaganda, accusing them of being brainwashed and ignorant. In some cases, I suppose I am. What else is left to conclude when someone's opinions on matters they previously shown no interest in are in lockstep with that week's Sean Hannity monologue? Most of the time, though, I try to keep a poker face in these moments, not wanting to rouse defensiveness or a sense of martyrdom in the people I'm interviewing. In this moment, however, while I'm sitting here with my oldest friend in the whole world, my guard is down, and I give Thad my unfiltered reaction, unleashing a geyser of repressed frustration I've amassed over my last 2 weeks in Iowa. Oh, I say, I suppose it must be a coincidence that you happen to unload a screed of anti-trans rhetoric, provoked only by the length of my shorts, at the same time the Iowa State Legislature is considering a bill to ban gender-affirming care for minors. You just happen to parrot all the conservative talking points on this issue, what, through the ether? Must be, he says, repeating that he never engages with any news source. His voice is beginning to tremble as my own blood pressure climbs. Just because I don't agree with trans people doesn't mean I don't love them as a Christian. I'm just tired of being called a bigot for not being down with all this. Wait, I ask, when did you start identifying as a Christian again? Before I realize it, I find myself uncrossing my legs and broadening my shoulders. I've always been this way, he says. It's you that moved away and changed. Isn't it interesting how people who move to big cities always become gay and trans? That's a ridiculously hyperbolic statement, I say, hearing my voice get loud and angry, my muscles twitching. It's true that a lot of queer people move out of places like North Iowa, but that's because they don't feel safe here. I stop for a moment, setting aside the news that he's now a Christian, who I also learn plays the guitar in the worship band of his parents' church. Though he was never an angry atheist like me, I do recall that Thad identified as agnostic for most of our adult years. But in this moment, I set aside for my need for a comrade in rebellion and think about the other thing he said. I'm tired of being called a bigot. I know that Thad retreated from social media a while back. A few months after this conversation, I'll hear from many people who unfriended him on Facebook because of his political statements about trans people, and is not in touch with any of our old friends from our 20s, the ones who are still alive. Thad's isolation on his parents' farm has made him bitter and arrogant, yet terribly thin-skinned. I later learned that he does indeed have a media diet. It just consists of podcasts and YouTube videos from conservatives like Jordan Peterson and Ben Shapiro, and that he's been regularly consuming psychedelic mushrooms and kratom. I can picture him in that crawl space of his dad's machine shed. That's where he's been living for the last decade or so. Tripping day and night, falling down rabbit holes of conspiracy theories about COVID and the trans agenda. Suddenly I could picture Thad in 1925, warned by the KKK about the threat black men posed to white women, or as a young hippie in the Jesus movement, flattered into thinking he was part of the chosen generation that would see the end of the world. They felt rejected by society and went conservative as a rebellion against the progressive establishment of the Christian left, just as many disaffected young white men today buy into the narrative that going MAGA is a punk rock move. In the early days of Nazi recruitment, Hitler never bothered soliciting the decadent intellectuals in Berlin who were preoccupied with a renaissance of expressionist filmmakers, cross-dressers performing at cabarets, or those in the Institute of Sexology arguing for acceptance of queers in history. Hitler's goons went into the countryside where poor young farmers and laborers felt left behind, both culturally and economically, in the sexual revolution of the 1920s, and economically, given the high inflation of raising grocery prices. Sure, I could debate him, pointing out that trans people have always existed in nature and throughout human history. The Talmud recognizes multiple genders, as do many Native American tribes, and that gender tropes such as pink for girls and blue for boys are relatively new marketing gimmicks of suburban capitalism. Excuse me. I want to point out that his favorite movie, The Matrix, was written and directed by two transgender sisters aiming to create an allegory for the trans experience. I want to rant about the variety of animals in nature that change their gender, convincing him that the conventional hetero-binary we've been prescribed by our conservative Christian culture is as ridiculous and primitive as the belief that the sun revolves around the earth. but I can see that this will only be taken as an attack, a condescension from the liberal city boy to the supposedly ignorant farm boy, yet another accusation of bigotry, contributing to the cycle of shame and rebellion animating our political times. Ultimately, though, what hurts me the most is not that Thad holds these views disparaging queers and journalists, but that he seems perplexed why I'd find them objectionable. And then I realized that I've never been terribly vocal or even articulate about my own sexuality, particularly when in Iowa. Surely Thad has always known that I'm a bit different. I suppose I could identify as gender nonconforming and pansexual, but these somewhat esoteric terms feel aggressive in the context of my conversation with Thad. Perhaps they shouldn't, and I should just be proud of who I am and what I want. There is still a little boy within me who is seriously pissed off at every conservative in Iowa for making me feel like I have to be an inauthentic version of myself in order to be accepted. I suppose Thad has found acceptance in the Christian right, as tragic as that seems to me. Like all of us deep down, Thad doesn't want to be left behind. "What's the most embarrassing thing you're going to say about me in your book?" he asks after a long moment of silence. "I don't even know how to answer that," I say. "You're certainly welcome to take a look before anything is published, if you want." During many attempts, Thad will consistently reject this offer. We are able to be civil long enough for me to agree to not divulge a number of details about Thad in this book, which is seriously disappointing, because many of these are stories I was eager to, with his help, bring to life in vivid detail, our teenage ambitions coming full circle. But then, on the bike ride back to the carnival, I begin to wonder, am I the music man in this situation? Am I exploiting the pain of my people just to advance my career? Am I so eager to view their story as tragic and mine as heroic that I'll manufacture a socio-political narrative in order to reflect that retroactively? Perhaps. But when I see Thad carrying himself with the same defeated, self-conscious posture as so many working-class Iowans, unable to muster an ounce of the creative passion we were bursting with as kids, it becomes apparent to me why I never sank into the swamps of sadness that seemed to have consumed him. I certainly felt pulled into that muck before I escaped Iowa at the age of 22. Since then, however, I've diligently worked to preserve the dreams Thad and I had cultivated so many years ago. More than just creating, it was the caring, the excitement for ideas, aesthetics, and a sense of awe that I didn't want to lose. Choosing tenderness over aggression, curiosity over convention, was what kept me from sliding down the dark tunnel of a syringe. It was less geography than a mindset that I had escaped. But where does that leave me with Thad? I was so desperate to see him today because I was searching for a home, a place of grounding, somewhere I could be authentic and understood, particularly for my effeminate manner and, admittedly, pretentious speech. I don't need him to agree with me, just to see me. But perhaps that's not possible in the politically charged times we live in. Perhaps, like the Christian novel This Present Darkness, Thad, my sister, and others here believe that I have been corrupted by the forces of evil, as evidenced by my woke politics, gay agenda, and efforts to subvert God's master plan for humanity, helping to usher in a revolution of Satan-worshipping vegans coming for your guns, oversized trucks, and MAGA flags. Maybe they see me as one of those characters from the Hell Houses, the Passion Plays, and the Left Behind films, who had the chance to be saved, but succumbed to the deception of Satan's tricks, lured by science, curiosity, and logic. We have an awkward, silent bike ride back to my car. Afterward, Thad texts me that my soul is broken. as of this writing, we have not spoken since. Thanks. Thanks for coming, everybody. I'm really touched to see so many faces out here that I love. Let me put my glasses back on so I can see a little better. You know, writing is a very lonely process. You don't get to have face-to-face collaboration like you do in most industries. You know, my agent, my editor, publisher, they all live in New York, and talk on the phone, Zoom, but it's not the same. And much of this I wrote while living alone in a cabin up in Divide. And, you know, I see so many faces here of people who gave me a lot of support. Some people who read early drafts of the book or just were there for encouragement, tell me they're proud of me, that they're rooting for me, and I just want you all to know it means a great deal, and I'm so happy that you guys are here tonight, so thank you. I think this is the Q&A portion of the evening, so if anybody has any questions, feel free.
Yeah. How did your family take the book?
TBD. My dad read some early drafts, and that was difficult. He had a hard time with it. I talk about like him having affairs, him being addicted to drugs, him having affairs in the church when he was supposed to be manning the suicide hotline. During the farm crisis, the suicide rate in Iowa spiked 400%, and so churches had outreach programs. And he ended up having an affair with one of the women that he was supposed to be counseling out of suicide, which is, you know, yeah, in this modern era, we're like, oh my God, that's akin to rape. And he had a difficult time with it, but in the end, he was very happy that I wrote it, and same with my mom. I reveal a lot of difficult things about my mom in this book, and she's read some chapters of it. She hasn't read all of it. I don't know if she will. Kind of prefer she doesn't, to be honest. But yeah, it's for the most part, we just don't talk about what I do for a living when I come home for Christmas. It's just something that's not discussed. Yes, Sheila.
Thank you. I want to thank you for going off script, off your presentation, because I think this was so meaningful for all of us. I can't wait to read everything and how you've intertwined all the themes, because I kind of expect you to do it so gracefully because of your talent as a writer. But I think tonight it was meaningful to all of us that you decided to focus on what you did tonight. So thank you for that.
Yeah. Did anyone see that Tig Notaro documentary? Yeah. It's so beautiful and heavy, but there's a part in that where she gets her cancer diagnosis in the afternoon and then just walks on stage and improvises a whole comedy set. I mean, it's heavy and touching, but it's funny at the same time. And I was always in awe of that, and thought of that earlier today. Of like, it seemed to be more of a challenge for me to just go ahead with the presentation that I had planned, and to pretend like nothing had happened and that I'm not upset and I'm not hurt. And I thought instead I would just kind of lean into it. Yeah. Anyone else? Yeah.
Hi, my name's Dee. Dee brought me here, and it's been really cool hearing, you speak about your life, and also hearing like how Dee knows you and everything, and it's been really beautiful. I have a question actually about kind of the state of the world that we're in right now. Is we do have loved ones with problematic views. There are people who we really wish like our personal relationship to that person could be enough for them to recognize the inhumanity of some of their views right now. And it is a feeling of like these people being preyed upon, for sure, you know, like these people we love who like their own ignorance and their own like desire to be part of something is used against them, right? And they feel almost like unreachable. So do you think that the experiences that you write about, you know, is there like a lesson to be taught about how we can attempt to bridge that? Or is it more that like, you know, for ourselves and for our sanity and for our health and to be able to find true community, that those relationships do have to be left behind?
It's a great question, and it is what I grapple with in this book. And I intended to make this book a little messy in that I don't have a prescriptive answer for that, but really wanted to illustrate the conundrum that you just articulated so well, because I think it is something that we all deal with. And as angry as we get, I mean, I don't want to speak for everyone, but like as infuriating as it can be to hear rhetoric like my friend laid on me, you still know them and love them and know their heart and want connection, want humanity, and want to put your guard down, but you get angry. Because these aren't just opinions that people have. It's not like they hated a movie that you really love. It's like, oh, you hate people that I really love. Like, I know how much this hurts people, and it hurts me. Like, this rhetoric has been used to torment me since I was a little boy. And it's not an easy thing to just set that aside and try to be the diplomat that's like kind and patient. But I often say that, like, and I say it in the book, that I often resist having any kind of ideology, any kind of like worldview that's like set in stone, like I know this to be true and that's a lie. But the few guideposts that I do have in life are compassion, playfulness, and curiosity. And I think, you know, I often say like it's helpful to be curious about people who have different beliefs than you, and not because like you might change your mind and think like, oh, you guys have a point, I'm signing up for the Republican Party. But you learn a lot about yourself when you learn about people you disagree with, and you sharpen your own perspective when you're forced to articulate what that perspective is. And also, I think people begin to let their guard down if you show that while I don't agree with you, I'm here, I'm listening, I'm giving you the attention that you deserve as a human being to speak your truth and to be heard. And I'll disagree, but I'm still gonna look you in the eye and know that there's a human being with a heart standing across from me. And I think, I know I've experienced in a lot of instances, both of us letting our guards down and learning from one another and expanding our own understanding of the human experience in the modern times we live in. Any other questions? Yeah.
So I know there's a gap between when you're done with the book and when we hold it in our hands on release day. Is there a story that upon reflection you wish was in the book, but at the time you had to put it to bed, you said this is enough?
Yeah, many times. And it's a weird feeling when the gate closes and you can't get at it anymore. Like, no, I want to add this thing, or I want to move this over here, or I want to cut that line. I mean, it's also kind of a relief at the same time where you're like, okay, for good or ill, it's out of my hands. I can sleep tonight knowing there's no more work to be done. I read a friend of mine's book, Exvangelical and Beyond, recently, and learned so much that I didn't know. I didn't know Billy Graham was supportive of abortion throughout most of the 60s and 70s. I knew that evangelicals didn't, Roe v. Wade was in 73. Evangelicals didn't give a shit until like 78, 79. Like it was totally politically fabricated. But Billy Graham had a line where he said, I believe in Planned Parenthood. And I was like, Jesus Christ, why didn't I know that? Like, I would have loved to have that in my book. So yeah, I've had a lot of moments like that, and a lot of moments of having a catharsis about my experience as a kid or my family that I'm like, oh, that would have added another dimension to the narrative that I wish was in there. But hopefully this book will be a success and I'll have an opportunity to write another one. So we'll see. I'm very enthused by all the seats being filled tonight.
And the floor.
Yeah. Anyone else? Yeah.
You do a lot of acting in the audiobook. Do you consider yourself like a writer-performer or just like writer-writer?
I certainly wouldn't put like actor on my resume or introduce myself as such. But I will say that I had so much fun with that audiobook. I started giving readings in Denver probably like 20 years ago and have loved reading aloud. I wanted to do the presentation with this just to challenge myself to step out of live reading because I've been doing it for so long. But I adore audiobooks. I listen to them every day. Almost every night I go to bed to David Sedaris in my ears, and he's like a god to me. His performances when reading his stuff, the voices he gives his dad and his brother, and Amy Sedaris on a couple of audiobooks, like just jumps in at random points and does performances. It's amazing. And with this audiobook, I was lucky to work with the same director that I did on the Runner's High audiobook, and we had meetings beforehand where I'm like, I really want to try some voices in here. Like, I know it's not my forte, but like, I want to give it a shot. And she's like, all right, well, I'll let you know if it's working or not. And most of the time, it made it through. Like I love doing Billy Graham's voice. There's a Louisiana preacher in the book that I loved performing of. I struggled with John Lennon's voice in a way that still haunts me. And it was so bad that it was the moment the director was like chiming in my ear like, this isn't working. And even I was like, okay, let's break for lunch. I'll work on it. I'll come back. Did like 4 or 5 more takes, and she's like, it's one of those things like you either nail it with a bullseye or it's a disaster. And it just remained a disaster, and I had to give up on that. But I think all the others made it in there. Oh, there was a German woman in the book, and I couldn't get a German accent down. I think I kept sounding like I was from Belgium. Yeah. Any other questions?
Do one more, if anyone has one more.
Anybody? Well, we can move on.
We'll move on to the signing.
Yay! Thanks for coming, everybody.
Thank you so